What are your boldest predictions for Texas football in the upcoming 2025 season? On today's show, we're going to dive into a few that I've seen online. That's next, right here on Locked On Longhorns. Intro.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin local, and longtime sports radio host here in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember to leave a comment. That's one of the fastest ways to help us grow right here on Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We will continue our deep dive preview of Texas fall camp, and we'll let you hear some sound from Coach Sark's appearance at the Texas High School Coaches Association Coaches Convention in San Antonio yesterday. That's a mouthful. But first, Chip Brown of Horns 24/7 and Texas Sports Unfiltered posted an article yesterday titled 3 Bold Predictions for Texas Football in the 2025 season. I wanted to read each one. I wanted to give my thoughts. And more importantly, I wanted to get y'all's thoughts in the comments below. What do you make of these predictions? And what are your hottest takes for the Longhorns this season? We'll start with number 1. Texas sophomore defensive end Colin Simmons will record at least 15 sacks. Last year, as a true freshman, Colin Simmons led the team with 9. He's openly talked about wanting to break Kiki Diala's single-season school record of 22 and a half sacks, which happened back in 1982. That is still insane. He only played 11 games that year, and he had 22 and a half sacks, a school record that still stands today in 2025. If Colin Simmons breaks that record, even with an expanded playoff and an extended season, he's going to be in New York at the Heisman ceremony in December. If you're curious, the FBS record for sacks in a season, recognized by the NCAA, is 24. Terrell Suggs, T. Sizzle, did that at Arizona State back in 2002. Ron Cox of Fresno State had 28 sacks in 1989. For some reason, the NCAA didn't recognize stats or sacks, or they didn't start keeping official stats for sacks until 2000. So Ron Cox really has the record with 28, but according to the NCAA record books, the all-time record is 24. The last Longhorn, bringing things back to Austin, to rack up 15 or more sacks in a single season, that was Kiki Diala in 1982. No other Longhorn has ever had more than 14 sacks in 1 year. So if you think, Chip saying, Colin Simmons is going to have 15 sacks is a bit soft, it's not, because nobody else besides Kiki has ever done that in a Texas uniform. Can Colin Simmons do it in 2025? I think he can. The tough part is he's no longer a freshman. Like, everybody knows who he is. He's not going to sneak up on anybody. Won the Sean Alexander Freshman of the Year award in 2024, was just named first team all preseason SEC last week. Teams are going to game plan to try to stop him. He's going to draw some double teams this year. Now, the good news for Colin Simmons, it's hard to double him on every play when you've got Trey Moore and Ethan Burke and Colton Vasek as the other edge rushers on this team. You've got a really good interior defensive line. You've got Anthony Hill blitzing up the gut and occasionally off the edge as well. So you can't focus solely on Colin Simmons because there are so many other great defenders up front on this defense that it's going to open the door for Colin Simmons to get some one-on-one opportunities. And shoot, the best pass rushers can win even when they are doubled. If Colin Simmons is as legit as he thinks he is, and as legit as Chip thinks he is with this prediction, he's going to get to 15 sacks this year, regardless of what other teams are doing to try to slow him down. So I'm excited to see what Colin Simmons does for an encore. He was incredibly productive, and it felt like he got better by the snap. Forget just by the game. It felt like he got better by the snap in 2024. What does he do with a full year under his belt and another full offseason working with Torrey Becton and the Texas strength staff, but also the Texas coaching staff? Can't wait to see Colin Simmons in his sophomore season. So that's prediction number one. Prediction number two, Texas will lead the nation in sacks this year. Sticking with the sacks stat, but now talking about the whole team. If you're curious, last year, Boise State led the nation in sacks. They had 55. Texas was fourth in that category last year, so they weren't far away. The Longhorns had 46. Ohio State finished second with 53. Penn State was fifth with 44. Why I bring that up? Well, number one, it helps having more games, playing more games. That gives you a better chance to increase those team statistics. But also, all four of those teams that I mentioned made the playoff last year. Having an elite pass rush helps you make the college football playoff, and it helps you win games when you get there. So it is important for Texas to be near the top of the country in that category once again. The question is, can Texas lead the country in that? Can they get to that 50 to 60 number? Again, Boise State last year at 55 to lead the way. Let's say anything over 50 gives the Longhorns at least a chance. Last year, Texas didn't have a double-digit sack guy. I mentioned Colin Simmons led the way with just 9. If Simmons gets to 15 this year, Trey Moore only had 5.5 last year. He didn't have a sack in the first 7 games of the season. If he's good and consistent all throughout this season, he could maybe be a double-digit guy as well. Ethan Burke only had 2. Colton Vasek only had 2. Can you get more from them? I think it's reasonable for the answer to that to be yes. Ant Hill had 8 last year. Could he creep into double digits? I think the answer to that could be yes. I'm not betting against Ant Hill with what we've seen from him in his first 2 years on the 40 acres. So Texas has a great defensive line. They've got a great linebacking unit. Athlon Sports says the Longhorns have the best D-line and linebackers in America. Phil Steele has the Texas D-line, I think, ranked number 9 in his position unit rankings, but he has the linebacking unit as number 1 in the country. It's a talented bunch. Can the Horns get there? I think if everybody plays up to their potential, they've got a really good shot to lead college football in sacks this year. That'd be fun. That'd be a lot of fun. Number 3, the last bold prediction we're going to dive into today. Arch Manning will break Colt McCoy's single-season touchdown passes record of 44. This is the one I'm the most bullish on. I think Texas has a chance to hit all 3 of these predictions, but this is the one that I think is most likely to happen. First of all, I cannot believe that no Texas quarterback has ever thrown 35 touchdowns in a season. With all of the great quarterbacks that have come through here, it almost feels made up that the single-season record is still 34. Why is it feasible? Well, the 2 years Steve Sarkisian was calling plays at Alabama, 2019 and 2020, he had quarterbacks throw for 40-plus touchdowns. Remember, 2020 was the COVID-shortened year, and even though Bama played less games, everybody played less games, Mac Jones still had 40 touchdowns that year. And a Mac Jones comparison, I think we want Arch Manning to be better than Mac Jones, but going into that 2020 season, that was Mac Jones' 3rd year with Alabama and his first year as a starter. He led his team to a national championship. He was a Heisman finalist that season. And, of course, his wide receiver, Devontae Smith, ended up winning the Heisman that year. So, year 3 for Arch. Year 1 as the starter with the program. Could he put together a 40-plus touchdown season? He only needs 35 to break the record. 34 ties it, 35 breaks it. I feel like it could be a 40-plus touchdown year for Arch Manning, obviously, if he stays healthy. Another reason why this feels feasible, well, Arch Manning is really good. I think this Texas offense is going to be really good. And I expect the Longhorns to play 14, 15, or 16 games this season, giving him a better chance to get to that magic number of 35. Arch Manning's going to take some shots. You're going to see more explosiveness from this Longhorn offense this year. He's way more of a gunslinger than Quinn Ewers was. May lead to a couple more interceptions, but I think it's going to lead to some more touchdowns as well through the air and some more big plays through the air for this Longhorn football team. And I think just the type of talent that Arch is, the style that he plays with, and the talent around him on this Texas offense with Steve Sarkisian calling the shots, I expect Arch Manning to throw for more than 34 touchdowns this season. So there you go. The 3 bold predictions from Chip Brown. I want to get your thoughts on these. Number 1, Colin Simmons will have at least 15 sacks. Number 2, Texas will lead the country in sacks. And number 3, Arch will break Colt's single-season record 34 touchdown passes in a season. What say you? Do you agree with those predictions? What are your boldest predictions? I'll do a segment or two before the season giving some of my hottest takes for the 2025 Longhorns, but I figured these were worth getting into. All right, comment below with your thoughts, please, and thank you. We are now just 8 days away from the start of Texas fall camp. We will continue our position room preview, talk about the biggest storylines with the running backs going into training camp. It's coming up next right here on Locked On Longhorns. Oh, but first, a word for our friends at Game Time. The second half of the MLB season is underway. If you want to get some last-minute tickets, you could do it with Game Time and the Game Time app. They have taken all of the stress about buying last-minute tickets away. You don't have to worry about anything when you use Game Time. Prices actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals. You get clear seat views so you know exactly what your vantage point is going to be before you buy your tickets, and they've got their lowest price guarantee as well. I'm telling you, all of the worry that used to come along with buying last-minute tickets, it no longer exists thanks to our friends at Game Time. And with the money you save, you can spend a little extra money on food, on drinks, on merch. Maybe you can even buy a ticket for your buddy. See if you have someone to go to the game with. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with our friends at Game Time. They have changed the game. Download the Game Time app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app. Use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and you are going to get $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back to Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Texas fall camp starts on July 30th. That is 8 days from now. And each day leading up to the 30th, we're taking a deep dive look at a different position on the Texas roster. Yesterday, we talked about the quarterbacks. Be sure to check out that episode if you missed it. Today, we are talking running backs, previewing the biggest storylines going into fall camp and discussing what the room could and should look like when the Longhorns take the field 39 days from now against Ohio State. I am really excited about the running back room. At the top, you got Quintravion Wisner, the only returning 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC. An incredible story, a former 3-star recruit, the 33rd ranked running back in the class of 2023. Don't sleep on those 3 stars, man. He was the 494th ranked player overall coming out of high school. Hell, he wasn't even Texas's biggest signee from his high school that year. Wisner went to DeSoto. That's where Jonte Cook went. Cook was the 5-star. He's not here anymore. Wisner, the 3-star, a little bit of an afterthought on the recruiting trail. He's the number 1 running back for what could be the preseason number 1 team in the nation. Wisner was massively important to the 2024 season. Once C.J. Baxter and Christian Clark got hurt during camp, Wisner was thrown into the fire. And then Jaden Blue caught fumbleitis, and Wisner's role increased even more. Like, Texas needed him to be really good to have the success that they had. And Trey Wisner was really good. I mean, that A&M performance, he was great against OU, over 100 yards and a touchdown against the Sooners in that blowout victory. But the final game of the regular season, the first Lone Star showdown since 2011, about 33 carries and 186 yards. It's stuff of legend. That's how you make your name as a college football player. You show up in those big games and you show up against your biggest rivals. Trey Wisner did that last year. I'm excited to see what he does for an encore. Put on a few pounds in the offseason. And look, now he knows what it takes to be a number 1 running back in the SEC. The good news for him, the good news for Texas. In every year that Steve Sarkisian has been a head coach in college football, he has had at least one 1,000-yard rusher. Wisner was that guy last year. I think there's a good chance he does it again this year. So excited. That's a big question. Like, what does Wisner do for an encore? But the biggest question for the Texas running back room going into fall camp, what are you going to get from C.J. Baxter? And what are you going to get from Christian Clark? I realize that's 2 questions. I probably should have just combined that to what are you getting from C.J. Baxter and Christian Clark this year? Both guys, of course, suffered season-ending injuries during fall camp in 2024, but the Longhorns in a tough spot. Remember, Texas had to go bring in a transfer running back 9 days before the season started just so they could have enough bodies last year. C.J. Baxter, we'll start with him. He's the number 1 running back recruit in America in 2023. The same class as Trey Wisner. and he was the starter for week 1 of his freshman year over Jonathan Brooks, who ended up being the first running back selected in the following NFL draft. That was the wrong decision by the coaches. It was. But it showed how much the coaches thought of C.J. Baxter from pretty much the moment he stepped foot on campus. Had a solid freshman campaign, 659 yards, 5 touchdowns on 138 carries. Also had 24 catches out of the backfield as well. Did deal with a couple of minor injuries, but again, when he was on the field, he showed a lot. And he showed why he was a 5-star and why the Texas coaches felt that he was going to be incredibly good from day one. So the question is, what is he coming off of a serious knee injury and serious reconstructive knee surgery? From a fall camp standpoint, I wonder how much C.J. Baxter is going to participate. He didn't do much during the spring. Sark talked last week about C.J. Baxter. It sounds like he's on the right track and he's been cleared and he'll be good to go for at least some of what's asked from him in fall camp. But is he doing everything? Is he taking hits, or does this coaching staff feel like they need to kind of wrap C.J. Baxter in bubble wrap just to make sure he's safe and healthy for the start of the season? Is he ready to go in week 1? All of those questions are going to get answered when we get to camp. Yeah, Baxter, if he looks like the 5-star he was coming out of high school, talk about a 2-headed monster with Trey Wisner and C.J. Baxter. That's going to be tough for opposing defenses to start. C.J. Baxter, one of the guys that I'll be paying the most attention to over these next few weeks leading up to game 1. And then Christian Clark, not to sleep on him, seemingly ahead of C.J. Baxter in his recovery process. Christian Clark tore his Achilles last fall, missed the entire season, but he did participate in spring practice. Now, I don't know what to expect from Christian Clark because we haven't seen him in a Longhorn uni yet, but we did see him get compared to Bijan Robinson by his former running back coach, Tashard Choice. Could he be that? Could he be 80% of Bijan? Or did that all go away with the injury? Achilles injury, it's pretty serious. Again, kind of a minor miracle that 7 months after suffering the full tear of the Achilles, Christian Clark was back on the field for spring practice. Maybe that means he does have a little Bijan to him, and he is kind of an athletic freak of nature. And we shouldn't count him out, even though he's probably the number 4 running back on this depth chart right now. Is he good enough to crack the rotation? Can he get significant playing time in his first real year at Texas? Big question. But Baxter and Clark, 2 guys that were expected to be contributors last year, especially Baxter. He was supposed to be your number 1 guy. We didn't see them play a single snap of football in 2024. What do we see in 2025? Another question. There's a lot of them. What type of year 2 jump do we get from the baby Rhino? Jarrett Gibson, 78 carries, 377 yards, 4 touchdowns last year. He was actually Texas's leading rusher after the 3rd week of the year. And then Trey Wisner kind of took over, and Jaden Blue became the number 2 guy. And baby Rhino played in pretty much every game, but he was sort of the number 3 tailback option. What does he do this year? Is he number 2 right now? Is he ahead of C.J. Baxter and Christian Clark because those guys are hurt? Does he get passed up by Baxter or Clark at some point? Gibson was a top 10 running back in the class of 2024. He's got talent. We saw it at times last year. You don't get a badass nickname like Baby Rhino unless people think you're pretty good. It looked like a bull in a china shop at times last season. What type of role does he have? Now, last year he was the short yardage guy for Texas. C.J. Baxter weighs 20 to 25 pounds more than Baby Rhino does. I think Baxter makes more sense as your short yardage and goal line guy this season. So does Gibson lose that role? I want to know. Again, I think he's good, but how does he fit into this running back room? And it's just going to be a fun competition to keep an eye on. Competition breeds excellence. I'm a big believer in that. Texas has 4 tailbacks that I think are good enough to be number 1s on a lot of teams in college football. And I'm not just talking like G5 type of schools. I think Jarrett Gibson could be a number 1 guy on a number of Power 5 teams in the country. Same thing with Christian Clark, same thing with C.J. Baxter, and none of those guys are the number 1 here in Austin. So what do we get from Baby Rhino this year? And then I'll be curious to hear about the 2 true freshmen early enrollees, James Simon and Ricky Stewart. Simon got rave reviews during the spring. One report called him Jarrett Gibson with better hands. Again, Gibson, 78 carries last year, played a big role in this offense. Could Simon do something like that this year? I don't expect a ton from either of the freshmen. Again, considering the depth that you have, hopefully the Longhorns aren't relying too much on either of those guys. But I think there's some bright futures for both Simon and Stewart. So, Yeah, a lot of questions with the running back room, but it's almost like you're screaming from a yacht here, to quote Steve Sarkisian. You've got talent, you've got depth, you've got experience. The question is, like, how do you slot these guys and how do you divvy up all of the carries that you're going to have as an offense this season? Phil Steele has Texas as the third best running back room in America, behind only Penn State and Notre Dame. I think Texas might have the deepest running back room in the country. I mean, Penn State's got the two-headed monster of Allen and Singleton. They're the best. Notre Dame's got Jeremiah Love back, and their backup's really good. But when you talk about four guys, maybe even five or six that are as good as what Texas has, I don't know if there's any team in the nation that can boast about that kind of depth. So the Horns in a very, very good spot. This should be, obviously it depends on the offensive line, but this should be one of the better run games in the sport this season. All right. We'll take your thoughts. Comment below. What do you expect from the running backs this year? We've got a little sound from Coach Sark, who spoke yesterday in San Antonio at the Texas High School Coaches Association convention. How are the Longhorns preparing for Ohio State in week 1? And does Steve Sarkisian care about his team's preseason ranking? We'll let you hear from him next on Locked On Longhorns. All right, final segment of a Tuesday show. It is Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. We are 39 days away from kickoff between Texas and Ohio State. And this is by far the toughest season opening game that the Longhorns have played in the Sark era. Of course, the Horns have played some tough non-conference games early in the year, but they've all been in week 2. The Arkansas game in 2021 was week 2. Sorry to bring that up. The 2 Bama games in 22 and 23, week 2. And, of course, last year's Michigan game in Ann Arbor, game 2. So, you opened up against a cupcake. You played a tough team in week 2, but you had that buffer week before playing your really difficult non-conference game. This year, you obviously do not have that. And for Sark, he's only opened up a season against a top 25 opponent 3 times in his coaching career. The last time was 2013 when he was the head coach at Washington. The good news is, Washington smacked Boise State, who was ranked number 19 in America, 38-6. There's a random historical nugget there. But Steve Sarkisian yesterday was asked about, hey, how do you prepare for that since you don't have that week 1 easier opponent? Here's what Sark had to say.
Historically, what we've done, and I don't mind getting into this, the first 2.5 weeks or so of training camp have been truly that of training camp. And then we've adjusted kind of into that third week of where we've gotten into that first opponent, that bigger opponent. So a few years ago, it was Alabama for that week. Last year, it was Michigan. This year would be Ohio State. And that was really implementing the game plan for that game. And then the fourth week, we would then game plan and prepare for our first opponent. Where this year, what it will look like more of kind of a 2-week process to get ready for the game. Similar in a sense, I guess you could say it almost to a bowl game. But yet the reality of it is probably a little more physicality, a little more opportunity to tackle and to do those things to make sure that you're sharp. That's always right. What are your biggest concerns going into a game? Your first game is A, tackling, that you make sure you can get people on the ground. B, ball security, that your ball carriers are used to being tackled, all right, so you're not giving up short fields. And then 3, dealing with performance anxiety, for some of the players who it's their first time on that stage that they're ready to perform. And so if I can put them in some of those elements as well as, the staff putting together a good game plan, and then we can get up there and go cut it loose and go play.
So there you go. Maybe the most interesting thing was an admission from Steve Sarkisian that in years past, we started preparing for our week 2 opponent before our week 1 opponent. And I think that's obvious. You look at the last 2 years, especially Texas going on the road and beating Alabama in 23 and then beating Michigan on the road last year. The Longhorns were clearly prepared, and you could tell they put a lot of stock into making sure they did what they had to do to win those games. But you don't often hear coaches actually admit that, we focused on that game before we focused on this one. Look, this year, it's obvious. I mean, you spend 2 weeks game planning for your week 1 opponent. You don't do 1 week game planning for week 2, 1 week game planning for week 1. No, everything is on this Ohio State game because, weeks 2 through 4, obviously once you get there, you're going to really focus on those 3 teams, but they're not this team. They're not Ohio State. So everything that Texas does right now is going to be about getting ready for week 1 in the shoe. And that's the team that knocked you out of the college football playoff last year. So there's your extra motivation right there. And look, Sark talked about 3 important things: tackling, ball security, and performance anxiety. Like, it's a fine line, because I feel like a lot of coaches don't want to be super physical during fall camp, because you don't want your players getting hurt in practice, before the games actually count. But also, you want to make sure you don't get embarrassed in your first game of the season. We know how good Ohio State is. Yeah, they lost a bunch of players to the NFL draft, but they're still Ohio State. They still have a ton of talent on that roster. And if you're not tackling well against Jeremiah Smith and C.J. Donaldson, Julian Sayin and Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes and all of the weapons that they have on that offense, they're gonna turn that day into a nightmare for the Longhorns. So tackling's important. Obviously, ball security is important. I think that's going to be a close game. I think most of us expect it to be a close game. Yeah, you can't have bad turnovers that cost you a chance to go win that game. And then performance anxiety. Yeah, for a lot of these guys, it is their first sort of big test. Arch Manning, this will be the first road start of his career. Texas is replacing a lot of guys who maybe were on the team last year, but did not play significant roles in any true road game that the Longhorns played. So this atmosphere is going to be nuts. Ohio State's going to be raising a banner. There's going to be 100,000 people there. I mean, they're pissed off about Texas rejecting their request to move the game to Sunday. So that adds even more fuel to the fire. It's going to be a crazy atmosphere. So just making sure you're as prepared for that as you possibly can be. All of those things make sense. But yeah, for Texas, you have to be practicing physical. I know it's going to suck if somebody goes down with an injury before the year. You don't want to deal with that again in 2025, but you have to make sure that you are buttoned up for one of your biggest games of the season and one of the biggest games of the year in college football. All right, real quick, I think we have time to squeeze this in. We've got the end of the question from Kirk Bowles, everyone's favorite Texas reporter, and then Sark's answer. He was asked if he cares about where the Longhorns are in the preseason rankings.
Would you prefer to be ranked number 1, or would you rather not be?
I don't really care about the rankings. Truth be told, I've sat up here and said the rankings don't matter when we weren't ranked very highly, and I don't think that's going to change if we are ranked higher. Preseason rankings are great, and I say it, they're great for the fans, and they're great for the popularity of our sport. It keeps the conversation of college football on the forefront of people's minds and the media and things of that nature, right? And I think that that's awesome for our sport, and that the fact that we're talking about week 1 matchups and all those things. But in reality, they don't matter. What we do on the field, the way we perform is going to be ultimately what dictates how our season goes. And so that part doesn't hit me too much that way.
So there's Sark, and look, he's right. I mean, I agree with Sark. I think preseason rankings are fun. We don't need to get rid of them. I know some of y'all hate them, and I can't quite figure out why they bother people so much. Makes the early season matchups more exciting. It makes underdog stories more compelling. It makes dunking on your rivals more fun when they start the year ranked incredibly high and then fail to live up to expectations. I had a pretty good time dunking on A&M baseball fans this year, didn't you? Like, if they were just that bad, well, it's A&M. Of course they're that bad. But because they started the year as the preseason number 1 and then they were that bad, it's like, it's a little bit more fun. So I think there's some fun that goes into preseason top 25s. But at the end of the day, what matters is what happens during the season. And what really matters is where you're ranked at the end of the season. So that's what Sark talked about, and he's absolutely right. Yeah, preseason rankings are cool. Texas is going to be ranked very highly, and I think they've earned it. But where are the Horns at the end of the season? That's what all of us care about more than anything else. All right, I care about y'all more than anything else. If you made it this far, thank you very much. Please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment, turn notifications on, all of those great things. We really do appreciate y'all's continued support of the show, and especially those of you who tune in every day. Can't thank you enough. For your next listen, brain fart there. For your next listen, check out Locked On Bets. My man Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers, they have you covered. Your one-stop shop for all of your sports betting needs, expert analysis, game picks, the lock of the day. They've got it all. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. More fall camp preview, more Longhorn football recruiting conversation, more sound from Steve Sarkisian on tomorrow's show. We've got it all. But until next time, horns up, mic's off. We'll see y'all soon. This is Locked On Longhorns.